The critics love The Player.
It's going to be funny? Yeah, it'll be funny.
We're going to have a little sex in this picture.
Yeah, sure, of course. We'll get it there.
No stars, just talent.
Bruce Willis.
I like Goldie.
No Schwarzenegger.
Angelica Houston.
Julia Robbins.
It's Oscar time.
I would thank my mother and her mother.
Robert Altman's
See, I told you, he's good.
The Player.
Yes.
Rated R. Now playing at a theater near you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Cuson. Here tonight, we are going to be finishing Robert Altman month very strong as we discuss one of the greatest Hollywood satires of all time, 1992's The Player. As always, please leave a 4 or 5 star review on Apple and Spotify to help get those algorithms going. You can also find me on Blue Sky at Jerome C 1985. In terms of our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for all those notifications. As I mentioned, we are discussing Robert Altman this month. We are finishing up with The Player. Brian, this has been probably one of our best months in terms of the movies that we have reviewed, and we have kind of hit four very different stages of Robert Altman's career, it seems. And I have made an executive decision that we're going to come back to Robert Altman in the month of August. We're going to be doing August with Altman, and we've already got a preliminary list forthcoming. So we are going to revisit him very soon, but we're going to, of course, go through our plans for the next few months. But I'm very excited to not only discuss this movie, but to also return to Robert Altman's filmography.
Yeah, August is going to be interesting because my first Robert Altman movie, I guess, would have been Popeye, but I didn't watch the complete whole thing consciously, I guess, until years later, like I saw when I was a kid. The first movie I really paid attention to that was Robert Altman was Gosford Park, because it came out at the right time where I started watching movies. So Gosford Park is going to be on that August list, and I'm really excited for that one. And I talked about Prairie Home Companion last week, or the week prior, and we're finally going to review it as his last film, and I get to finally back up my claim that movie had the best music in comparison to Nashville, and that's how you do the music, because it was so good. So we'll talk about that and a few other little tidbits here and there throughout his career, but those are the big two that I'm looking forward to, because that's when I started watching Robert Altman movies, around that time frame. And Gosford Park, I think, was an experience for me, considering I was the youngest person in the theater when I watched it at the time. But I was able to pick up on everything, and it's a murder mystery, folks, so that's what I'm really excited about. And what I'm really excited about The Player is that it's kind of a murder mystery as well, and it kind of just plays on that. And The Player, like I talked about for the last couple of weeks, I've been hyping it up. My goodness, this was my main event for the month, and it did not disappoint. And all those jokes that I kind of vaguely remembered kind of came back, all fluttering back to me, because the first time I watched The Player was in freshman year of college at the CSUN Theater. I hadn't seen it since, but I had seen some clips here and there. And when I tried to describe the movie to Jerome, it was just hard to describe, because I gave him a list of all these celebrities that are in the movie that are not even, they're insequentials in the plot, but they're all in the movie. And it's just so incredible how Robert Altman got all these people to come together for small little roles, playing themselves, playing small detectives. I came out at the end of this movie thinking we were robbed of Whoopi Goldberg being a detective in a movie or a TV series, because that is just perfect for her.
Totally agreed. I think this movie is very close to being Robert Altman's best. I think it falls a little short. I think the first half is so much stronger than the second half in a lot of ways, before just an incredible ending. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough how brilliant this pays off, and we'll talk about the ending more later. But I think what makes this movie work is just how savage the satire is. I mean, this movie treats its subjects with absolute disdain, and I think as greasy and slimeballish as Tim Robbins' character is, the crazy thing is just how bad everybody else is in comparison. Every character is just completely detestable in so many ways. And really, they're not murderers. They're not necessarily breaking the law, but just the way that they conduct themselves, the way they talk, the way they gossip. Everybody's just so hateable. And I think about the first few minutes of this movie in particular, just the way that Buck Henry pitches The Graduate 2 in just the most disgusting way possible, the most cynical way of doing a reboot or a legacy sequel. Like you can see that and see how so many of these legacy sequels have come about because of crap like that, and it continues, and the satire is so on point. And the thing about Tim Robbins is he plays insecure so well, and that's what I think makes that Shawshank Redemption performance stand out. Like he is able to play as somebody who is insecure, and it just manifests itself with rage. And I think that's what he does so much better than a lot of other actors. And again, you see it in Shawshank, and you also see it here. And I think what makes this performance just as good in so many ways is the fact that Tim Robbins actually does kill somebody in this movie, and like he gets away with it. And it's such a sin. Again, I come back to this idea of cynical. This movie is so cynical, and this is not Robert Altman's first movie after Popeye. Like he was wandering around. He definitely made some movies in the 80s and the 90s, but I think for us, going right from Popeye to this is perfect because you just feel Robert Altman's venom about Hollywood and just his general ideas about Hollywood showcased in this movie. And again, coming off of Popeye that we reviewed last week, this feels like the logical follow-up to Popeye because you can imagine, like, in reality, it's 12 years later, and you could see Robert Altman being really pissed off about Hollywood in general and just pouring that into this movie.
Yeah, and for the record, this is not an original idea from Altman. This is an adaptation of a book by Michael Tolkien. He also took on the screenplay as well, and he was kind of hesitant to do the screenplay because he figured, no one in Hollywood would want to make this movie because it's so venomous about Hollywood. But of course, Robert Altman was all about that, and he just dove into it, and you get this great script. And I think to be honest, I think it's better than Nashville because, I mean, yes, the cameos are great, but just the layer of like dialogue and the layer of like mystery and the layer of like all the film noir stuff that they tease. It's just all these different layers that just add up until that amazing ending where the bad guy wins, so to speak, if we can even say that. But to be kind of clear on what the plot is, this guy, Tim Robbins, he's like this, studio exec taking pitches all day. And basically he's getting these like threats, right? These threatening letters that you would usually get from like someone who's like a killer in a noir film or a detective story. And he's getting these, not necessarily, I guess, physical threats, but just like warnings about how he's like a bad person, and then that he screws over writers, and that he's like Hollywood scum or whatever. And he's trying to figure out who's sending these letters, and he kind of finally figures out who sends them, and we can argue about who sends the actual postcards. And he comes to this conclusion that it's this guy named David Kahane, who's played by Vincent D'Onofrio, who's, let's face it, man, this guy, I don't know what it is with weight, but like for some reason in the 90s he was super thin. In the 80s he was chunky, and then he got chunky again. So I don't know if it's just like a weight thing, or maybe he was just doing some cocaine at the time, because 90s is, But man, he just looks so thin in this movie. I was shocked. And then not only that, you get this like this thing about him trying to track him down to like, hey, please stop sending these postcards, but he never says it outright to him. And then all of a sudden they end up like fighting each other accidentally or something. And Tim Robbins just puts his face in a puddle and just drowns him straight up. So you could argue in a way that I guess it's technically, he could argue it's self-defense, but he went too far. And like after everything seemed to be settled, he continued the violence on D'Onofrio and then drowned him. So that's basically the murder. And there's no witnesses, or is there a witness? We don't know. He kind of gets away with it. And then all of a sudden this weird thing with the wife happens, because the one thing I do criticize about this movie is the wife character of David Kahane, because it seems like, A, she doesn't care about her husband, and somehow they get along for so long that they were married, and B, it's like, we don't even know where she comes from, and she's like painting all these paintings and not selling them, and it's like, how are you paying for your house? Right? It's like, it's like you're just sitting there all day painting, and then you're just kind of this mysterious female character. But I think that's the satire, I believe, as the reason why, like, the whole, like, the wife of the dead person is this mysterious, sexy woman gimmick. And that's kind of this been Hollywood trope, right? With Sunset Boulevard and all these different noir movies. That becomes the gimmick. And I think they wrote it like that on purpose, even though I found it kind of annoying that they had these, like, this dialogue of about, I want to sleep with you, but I just met you. And it's like, you just met over the phone and this dude was stalking you, and yet you seem to be under his trance. So it's very strange the way the love story goes, and he ends up marrying her and having a kid. But at the same time, it's like you killed her first husband. So it's this crazy ending that kind of reveals itself at the end, that he gets away with it because of the stupid eyewitness. I don't know if you want to talk about the stupid eyewitness, because that kind of ties in with the Whoopi Goldberg thing. But man, what a twist, and the twists and turns to get there, and the amount of sweat that Tim Robbins is like sweating in the third act because he's going to get caught is unbelievable. So
yeah, sweaty. It's just a sweaty movie, and it's a very Hollywood movie. Like I love just that sunlight, that perfect Los Angeles sunlight that so many movies in the 90s seem to nail well. You really feel that permeating this movie as well. I mean, you could only make this movie, I feel like, in Los Angeles, just because just everything from the studios. I mean, the catch, like, this movie had me locked in right when it said movies. What was the line? It was movies now more than ever. I mean, just absolutely nailed it. Like, that is the kind of phrase that is just so pat and so full of shit that you could see some Hollywood executive being like, yes, that is the perfect line. That is exactly what we want our company to represent. And the fact that it comes back, it's so good. This movie, this nails a very specific kind of satire. And that's the thing that when we talk about Robert Altman, and I really need to read more. I need to find a good Robert Altman book. Like, in so many ways, it feels like he is one of the best satirists of the 20th century, because, I look at MASH, I look at Nashville, I look at this movie, and I'm like, these are tremendous satires. And just the way that they are funny, but they can also exist as not satires too. Like, you can watch the movies and treat them straight as well. And I think Nashville in some ways feels less of a satire and more like an homage to a very specific type of Nashville. But I've just been so impressed just watching the way that this builds. And again, McCabe and Mrs. Miller is not a satire, but just the way that it plays against the Western genre. And actually, like, the idea of the anti-Western seems antithetical to, like, in some ways you have to be the genre even if you're anti. But I think McCabe and Mrs. Miller actually earns the title of earning that anti-Western title. And I think this movie also, in terms of Hollywood satires, I think in a lot of ways, I think they can let them off in easy, but this movie does not let anybody off easy. And just the way that they critique, like, changing the endings of movies, and just the way that the actors talk to each other, and just how vile everybody is. I mean, the Burt Reynolds cameo was just tremendous, because, I mean, just I want to see more Burt Reynolds playing himself and being a complete dick, because his 2-minute cameo in this movie just about steals the show because of how acidic he is.
Yeah, so let's kind of go over some of the cameos. Like, you can look at the list on Wikipedia. It's a list of names, folks. It's a list of names. But at the same time, it's like they do this thing where they're planting this joke about Julia Roberts throughout the whole thing. It's like every time that Tim Robbins hears a pitch, if there's like a female lead, it's like, maybe we can get Julia Roberts. I was thinking someone like a Julia Roberts type. Oh, we can definitely get Julia Roberts. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the movie, they get Julia Roberts for this pitch that was in the beginning of the movie that ended up becoming a movie. So I don't know. I think we should focus on that too, because, like, this idea that Richard E. Grant comes as a character named Tom Oakley, pitches a movie with his agent Dean Stockwell, which I think was a great.
And I want to point out that Richard E. Grant has the exact same hair that he still does have. Just want to point out.
He still looks the same, dude. Like, I was in shock. Like,
he looks like 45 years old in this movie. And he's still 45.
He made me want to watch Warlock, which I had no interest in because that was like one of his first movies, and that's like a fantasy movie. But since he's in the lead, now I'm kind of like intrigued because he has a lot of dialogue in that. So I don't know. But he pitches this movie to Tim Robbins at this restaurant where it's called Habeas Corpus, and it's about this DA falling in love with this, like, murder criminal, or it's Julia Roberts' character essentially, and she didn't really do it, and you find out it was an accident, but they're gonna put her in the death chamber or the gas chamber, and it's gonna be this down ending, and there's gonna be no celebrities, there's gonna be no names, only talent, blah blah blah, and they accept the pitch. But then if you go to a year later, it's like everything that's opposite of what he said. There's stars, there's a happy ending, they changed the ending. They got Julia Roberts, and then fucking Bruce Willis is the DA, and they show the scene from the movie where he comes in, gets a shotgun, blasts open the gas chamber to save Julia Roberts, and Julia Roberts goes, "What took you so long?" And then Bruce Willis goes, "I was stuck in traffic." And I just laughed my fucking ass off. It's so incredible, man. Like, that's how you do a Bruce Willis cameo, right? Because that's such a Bruce Willis moment thing to do. And then Julia Roberts with that smile. And then not only that, but like we see this cut of like fucking what's his name? Peter Falk and Susan Sarandon just standing there. I guess
literally no.
They were just standing there, and I think they were the investigative reporters of the fake movie, because that seems what they were doing. But I just kept thinking, like, Peter Falk in a murder mystery, and you just cut to him right after the big reveal in a satirical like movie set. Oh my God, it's such a like layered thing to do. But my goodness, that look of Peter Falk was just so amazing, because he looks like he's straight out of Columbo. And Susan Sarandon's just standing there. So, man, that scene is just so great for the ending, and it kind of sets up this idea that whatever good intentions that they had in making the movie initially went
Hollywood
out the window.
Hollywood is going to ruin you no matter what.
And that the joke is that it tested poorly in Canoga Park. And I literally live next to Canoga Park, like on the border. Like, I get so much mail that says Canoga Park. So when they said that, I popped, because I was like, oh my God, are they talking about the Fallbrook Theater? Are they talking about the theater that was taken away back in the 90s on Topanga? So I was just like mind blown when they dropped that line. And I'm thinking just like, wow, like that's such a thing that does happen, because a lot of LA test audiences end up changing endings. Like, we're experiencing it now because, I mean, as of this recording, the new Captain America is supposed to come out, and they cut like half the movie out and redid half the movie because it tested poorly, and we ain't gonna see your boy Seth Rollins in the movie anymore because it got cut. So it's like this thing still happens.
By Giancarlo Esposito, which is remarkable to me that you were playing. It's like, let's just get Esposito to kind of bail us out. That's the impression I'm getting, but.
That's what happened. It's like we needed Julia Roberts to bail us out from the bad ending, apparently, or something. It's so good, and we joked that John Cusack and Angelica Houston were kind of just sitting there at a table during a lunch hour with like all these different Hollywood people, and I had to look it up, and it kind of just came randomly because it was a Siskel and Ebert episode. But apparently, they were just working on a movie together. So that's why they're kind of like tied together. And in that movie, they kind of had a slightly incestuous romantic relationship, because Angelica Houston plays his mother, who's like 14, like had her at 14 years old. So that's going to, cause some trouble. Yeah. But I think she got an Oscar nomination for it, and she was on this big run at the time. So, yeah, Angelica Houston.
I think this is just after she broke up with Jack Nicholson. She went on a run, didn't she?
I think it was right during it, and then it kind of peaks with Addams Family. I think the Oscar nominations stop around there.
Right, because she does Witches, she does the two Addams Family movies. Yeah, she definitely went on quite a little run, and yeah, she's pretty underrated. And John Cusack barely looked like he even shaved for this role. So pretty funny stuff. I also have to say, I think Peter Gallagher plays a Don Draper type extremely well, and it's a shame that we never got to see more of that Peter Gallagher. I mean, he's still very good in a lot of the things that he does, but I think as he's kind of like, once you get into like the early aughts and he's on the OC, he's more playing dad, big time corporate business roles. And in a movie like this, he's playing, again, a Don Draper type where he's fast talking, can literally turn any headline into a movie. And I think it's a really good performance as well. And I love the idea that even though he and Tim Robbins hate each other, like, he still found a way to gain power with the studio. Like, that's how cynical everybody is that two people who can't stand each other can just work together because nothing matters. It's just about money.
I mean, it sounds like you're describing Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff's relationship in WCW 2000, but that's a whole different financial situation than this one, obviously. But man, we talked about Whoopi Goldberg. I think her as a detective is like a such missed opportunity because she nails that role very well. And I was thinking, like, is she pretending to be stupid, or is she pretending to not know that she's like?
I mean, she's in a lot of ways,
but I think
behaving like Columbo, right?
I know, and it's so like, oh, it's so good. Like that scene where like they're in the Pasadena police station and he's in for questioning, and there's all these other factors coming in talking about like all these different things around the office that have nothing to do with the plot, and it's just there to like kind of increase the tension of Tim Robbins like sweating and like being like jittery, and like if something falls he's turning around and jumping, and it's like there's something obviously up with him and she knows it, but they can't quite figure out what's going on, and that she tries to question him and he fires back. So there was some good stuff there, and I felt like there should have been more Whoopi Goldberg detective scenes, but it didn't need it, I guess. There was only about 3 scenes with her as a detective, but man, that's such a missed opportunity because I think that's the kind of the role she needed, right? Like that's more so than some of the roles she got. Like
she's coming off winning the Oscar for Ghost. This is definitely one of her first roles after that. So she's also on a nice little run here, doing Star Trek, just kind of being around. And it's unfortunate that we don't see her in this kind of role. Again, I think this is, especially when you get to detectives in terms of leads, like it's mostly a white male game. I'm sure. I mean, if this wasn't really a lead performance, so that's why she got the opportunity. But I think that this is one of the best uses of Whoopi Goldberg that I've seen, because sometimes I think I think Sister Act is a good example of using her well, but like sometimes it just feels like she doesn't. And I'm thinking of a movie like Eddie, which is just really cloying in terms of how annoying it is. But I mean, this movie just uses her perfectly, and it's great to see. Like I said, there's so many different performances to this. I also want to highlight Cynthia Stevenson, who I think does a great job as Bonnie, and like she is always trying to be like the voice of reason. She's like the uncorruptible person in a very corrupt world, and in the end, she gets fired for standing up for what's right, and it's perfect.
Yeah, and she does look like Britt Baker. I had to point that out. She could almost be Britt Baker's mom, and you could have told me that, and I would have believed it. But in terms of that, it's heartbreaking, but it shows you like it's supposed to show you the dark turn that Tim Robbins takes, because they were a couple, or not a couple. They were seeing each other unpublicly, right? Kind of hiding in the shadows. And then they kind of like break away, and Tim Robbins finds this, he finds the hot wife of Vincent D'Onofrio, who he just killed, and settles for her instead, right? And it just makes it so like such a slimy thing to do, but that goes with the character of Tim Robbins' character, and it's just so good. Yeah, the relationships that Tim Robbins go through, his female relationships kind of reflect that sliminess, that kind of that need to rise to power.
And I like that his hair gets more and more discombobulated as the movie goes along. That's also, I mean, it's not subtle, but it's a really nice touch.
I thought some other subtle things too was like when he had to do the lineup, because he gets chosen as like a possible eyewitness or like a possible suspect to the murder. And so he has to go through a lineup. He has to wear the same clothes that he wore that night, and it looks like he just never washed the clothing, which I was thinking like, dude, you're going to give it away that you've got like dirty, muddy water on you, that you choked this guy out, and like you got to make sure there's no blood on your clothes, because that's another dead giveaway. But he got away with it. And the thing about it is like the person that chooses the line, or the witness, or the suspect in the lineup, chose the cop that was undercover just to like kind of blend in and kind of throw off the lineup. So she got it wrong completely. So it's like, wow, like he just totally got away with it. And David Kahane, I don't know. Was he sending the postcards, Jerome? I don't know. He was getting the postcards after his death. But I kind of think that what they were implying is that the guy on the phone is supposed to be the guy that was giving his eulogy at his funeral, right?
That's kind of what I assumed.
That's what I think too.
I mean, I think the point of the movie, though, is that it doesn't matter who actually committed the murder. I think that's the whole idea. And I don't know if I mean, Twin Peaks was a really big deal. I don't know if this was done as some kind of a nod to that, because that show famously, did not want to reveal the killer, and they had to because of the network thing. So I don't know if like they're parodying or satirizing the idea of even having a murder mystery and just not solving it. But it's just a really impressive piece of filmmaking, because I think a movie like this could just really fall and collapse under the weight of all the celebrity cameos. Because I think, especially when you're watching these Marvel movies, like sometimes the amount of recognizable faces can become distracting. But I think this movie, I think Robert Altman is so good at just putting people in the crowd and making it feel natural and realistic that I don't think it becomes a distraction. Like if there's ever a director who can have a movie where there are 60 characters or 30 characters or 24 characters, like this is what Robert Altman can do so well. And it's a shame that we don't have more directors who can do this well, beyond, like, again, when you have like 85,000 characters in a superhero movie, which is very different than something like this, because this is a movie that is trying to say something and has kind of an overreaching point beyond just being trying to be funny. Like this is trying to make a point about this is the literalization of Casey Muse's line in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I hate how fake Hollywood is.
Pretty much. And you mentioned like this idea of like taking a cast of like 20 to 60 people and kind of like making a movie out of it. A year later, he would direct a movie called Shortcuts, which we kind of discussed about reviewing, but it's just kind of hard to find on streaming.
It is extremely hard to find.
It's really long. It's very long, but it's also the inspiration.
I don't care if it's 3 hours. Like I'll happily watch it, but the accessibility is a real issue.
Yeah, I'm just letting people know ahead of time if they're kind of looking for a movie called Shortcuts that it's long as fuck, but it's also the inspiration to that Simpsons episode where they kind of jump from character to character, and that I think it's season 3 or 4 of The Simpsons, where it's like 20-something odd stories about all the random Simpsons characters, and they jump from character to character, and that's exactly what Shortcuts is. So, Robert Altman, man, he knows how to like influence in the right ways, I think, because that's one of the better Simpsons episodes of that era, I think, because it's so involving of all the other characters, and you get to see all the different perspectives of all the different characters in Springfield. So I thought that's a great influence to have, like Robert Altman, that movie, and then kind of using that format for The Simpsons was like the total right move. So, I give this movie a 9 out of 10, Jerome. Like, I'm very high on this movie. Like, I'm glad this was the main event, because I've been hyping this up, and I know you hadn't seen it yet, and it lived up to the expectations. So that's a great win for me. Usually some of my recommendations kind of go, under the wayside when it comes to Jerome, but this one is like right at the top. So I'm glad we got to talk about this. And Fred Ward is unbelievable in this, because he's just kind of like there as the background, like
he's a security heavy.
More than security, I think he's a fixer, or that term, the fixer, or if you need a body taken out, covered up, you go to him, kind of thing. And
if you even need a body, you could just he'll find one for you. That's exactly. What he does so well.
He mentions at the beginning when you see him that like movies nowadays don't have a great tracking shot, blah, blah, blah. You see it in Touch of Evil, blah, blah, blah. And as he's saying this, the opening movie is an 8-minute tracking shot. So I'm just like, dude, this is satire at its best. And not only that, I think the little things about this movie in terms of the visuals, like it's not like a visually stunning movie. It's just a great lit movie. But at the same time, the costume is great, because you got these early 90s suits. Like Tim Robbins got these baggy suits for the time.
Oh, fucking suits, man. I mean, it's just what we're rethinking in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, those suits are obnoxious.
Yeah, it seems like they're just so, like, and Tim Robbins is a tall dude, so it's like, it's got to be like a 2X on the guy or something.
It's just embarrassing. Like, it looks bad, and I don't blame him. Again, the fact that it's a satire makes it okay, I think. But in terms of like this movie, like that's probably the thing that ages the worst is Tim Robbins' fashion, because it's so bad.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to point out is the shades. Did you notice the use of shades in this movie, where like there's all these shades in the windows, and every time in the tracking shot we see Tim Robbins hear these different pitches, we see it through the shading, and then when he's confronted by Fred about the murder,
the only person who used the shades, The only person who uses shades better than Robert Altman is Tony Scott. Tony Scott is the king of those shots, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And maybe that again, maybe Altman is like parodying that in some way, like he's parodying like Top Gun and like a lot of other Tony Scott movies. But again, it's extremely well done.
For sure, and that kind of tops our, I guess, our discussion on the movie. It's an incredible film. It's on HBO Max right now. It's only 2 hours and 4 minutes. I wish it was longer, to be honest, and give me more. That's Whoopi Goldberg kind of, detective stuff. But again, they picked their timing well and the editing well, and I think it just at 2 hours and 4 minutes, it's like the right length. And yeah, and they also talk about different things about like the bicycle thief, which I've never seen, but again, I guess picking that as the specific movie as like in the background for the murder was kind of like purposeful. So there's all these different layers to this movie for a lot of different different reasons, and all the actors and all the movies. And the other thing too is like if you look at the postcards, it's all these different scenes from all these different noir films, and it's hard to like look at them all because there's so many postcards because if you look in the shot of the drawer, there's like a bunch of postcards and you only see a few, and I think one is a reference to Sunset Boulevard, but I'm sure there's all these different references to all these different noir films. So again, just layer upon layer when it comes to Robert Altman.
Yeah, I'm not quite in a 9. I'm more in an 8.5 because I think the movie does lose a little bit of steam in the second half. But the ending is so good that I think it really the way that this movie is able to pay things off with Julia Roberts, with Bruce Willis. I mean, it's something that I think you have to give credit to Robert Altman for bringing this all together and just really nailing the feeling of what a movie like this should be. And again, picking the right person. Like Julia Roberts in 1992 is literally the perfect person to select for the It Girl, and just parodying that idea. I mean, like if they made this movie now, like Mikey Madison would be the person, right?
Pedro Pascal, I'm telling you.
Or possibly Zendaya. Like you would definitely see those two in that same, talked about in the same way that Julia Roberts is. But I mean, it's high quality stuff. This movie is so good, and that is going to bring us to the end of Robert Altman month. We are going to come back August with Altman. We're going to review 4 more of his movies, including his last one and one of his best in Gosford Park. I believe we are also going to do MASH because, I mean, we have to do MASH if we do a second month of Robert Altman. But we are going to be changing things up. Brian is going to be, it is Brian's turn to select the theme for the month of March. We have done tournament month in the past, but it feels like March Madness doesn't really have as much relevance as it used to, and I think that we're going to go in a very different direction.
Yeah, we're going to be marching with Murphy, Eddie Murphy, that is. And we've been talking about doing an Eddie Murphy month for a while since we did the Beverly Hills Cop trilogy, and I think this is the right time to do it. And we're going to start out hot. We're going to start it out with 48 Hours. And because it's the right match.
Back to Walter Hill, I want to point out. We're going back
also directed by Walter Hill, and we'll talk about that as well. And we'll also talk about the sequel, which we're not going to be reviewing, but it also ties into Brian James, who's also in The Player as a studio head. We'll talk about him next because he turns out to be a villain in the sequel, and that's kind of a retcon. But 48 Hours is going to be the first one. Then the next week is going to be Trading Places. Then the next week is going to be a movie that I don't think me and Jerome have either seen, Harlem Nights, which also has Richard Pryor. But that's going to be interesting to watch. And I kind of jump ahead of time a little bit to Bowfinger from 1999 because I don't think Jerome's seen that either, but I love that, and I feel like it's gone under the radar the last 20 years, and it hasn't been.
It's one of Murphy's last great movies, I would say, in that era. And I mean, I think you and I were really desperate for him to come back after Dolomite Is My Name. And boy, has it not been. It's been disappointing. Like Beverly Hills Cop 4 was okay. Coming to America was not great. It feels like we were on the precipice of an Eddie Murphy renaissance, and it just fizzled out.
You never know. You never know. Because he did have some good streaming movies. Not good streaming movies, but did have some Amazon streaming movies as well to get that extra money in the pocket.
I mean, he's done these family movies and they're not good.
Yeah, I've seen some of the trailers. I'll skip them, but at least he's getting a paycheck. But in this case, we're going to talk about Eddie Murphy in his heyday and kind of his peak in '99, I guess. But the right match is going to be kind of a pair up, and it's going to be kind of like a parody of 48 Hours. It's like this idea that Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy come together, two completely different people coming together. So if that kind of rings a bell, it sounds like a tag team. And I decided to pick the Rock and Sock Connection coming together, and that kind of fits the bill where the Rock's kind of the straight-laced guy, Mick Foley's kind of the comedy guy, and you bring them together and the crowd goes nuts. And we're going to watch the match where they first come together and win the tag titles right off the bat against The Undertaker and The Big Show. I think the date is August 29th, 1999. It's the Raw match. I got confused with the Buried Alive match. We're not going to watch that one. But I think we'll watch the initial angle that brings them together earlier in the night, and then watch the match later on. It kind of fits the theme anyway, so I think it's a good fit. And some 99 Rock Mick Foley action is going to be fun to watch. And then, well, I guess we'll talk about Big Show, because I think at this point he's already turned 3 times, and he's only been in the company 9 months. So there you go, folks.
Pretty crazy to think. I guess we could have done. I mean, it would have been really hard to do, like, if we were to do it and really match it up. Like, I don't think you want to do Scott Norton and Ice Train as a team, right?
Oh, no. They I don't want to hear their promos, Jerome, because
oh my goodness.
they needed Teddy Long, and they didn't have him on board too long. So that's a whole different WCW discussion that
yes, Rock and Sock Connection is perfectly acceptable. Yeah. And well, I'm sure we'll get into that more next week. For Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week and next month.